Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, the waves beneath Sablewind Pier carry more than the sound of the sea. At dawn, a lifeless body was discovered tangled in the rocks below the old wooden planks, and every villager now whispers the same chilling question: who placed the corpse there? And why beneath Sablewind Pier? But fear not. Hercule Poirot is here with his brilliant little gray cells ready to outshine even the darkest coastal shadows. Settle in, let the fog roll around you, and allow the mystery to unfold step by step. Thank you for joining us. Let the investigation begin. Chapter 1. The Body Beneath the Pier. The first scream came from the gulls. It was early morning at Sablewind Village, and the fog hung thick over the ocean like a curtain pulled across the world. Fishermen moved quietly along the harbor, preparing nets and lanterns, whispering in the heavy silence of dawn. The sea was restless, pushing waves against the old pier with a slow, rhythmic anger. And then the gulls erupted into wild, frantic cries. It was Rowan Fisher, the young boatman, who glanced down first. He had been hauling a rope over his shoulder when something caught his eye between the rocks beneath the pier. A flash of pale skin, a shape that the tide refused to move. He froze. The rope slipped from his hands. Dear God! He whispered. He stumbled closer, boots sliding on wet stone, until he saw the truth fully. A man lay wedged between two jagged rocks, half soaked by the rising tide. His shirt was torn, his coat ripped at the collar, and his face, what little of it was visible, looked twisted in a frozen mask of shock and pain. The corpse had not washed up by accident. Someone had placed him here. Rowan staggered backward, almost tripping over a jutting beam from the underside of the pier. His shout echoed across the harbor. "Inspector! Someone, there's a man dead under the pier!" The village sprang into motion like a kicked beehive. Doors opened. Footsteps rushed. Gasps filled the air. And in the midst of the gathering panic came a figure who did not run, but walked with calm, deliberate steps. He wore a dark coat, a bowler hat, and a mustache groomed so precisely it seemed carved from silver. Hercule Poirot approached the pier with the careful grace of a man who had never once slipped on a wet surface. "Mise Amos," he said gently. "Stand back, if you please. Let us not disturb what the sea has revealed." Inspector Graves, broad-shouldered, tired-eyed, stepped beside him. "Poirot," he muttered, "I was hoping this wouldn't be murder. But look for yourself." Poirot leaned forward, peering at the body below. The gulls circled overhead, crying impatiently for their morning meal. Poirot ignored them. He studied the angle of the man's limbs, the strange position of his coat, the way his pocket had been turned inside out, the faint scrape marks on the rocks, as if the body had been dragged. Poirot's little gray cells stirred. This man, Poirot murmured, did not fall. He was placed. Graves exhaled. "I feared as much." Poirot pointed with his cane. "Observe, Inspector. The rocks beneath him show signs of disturbance. The sand around his shoes is uneven. Someone moved him after death, perhaps to stage a tragic accident." Rowan swallowed hard. Who would do such a thing? And why under the pier? Poirot lifted a brow. Because the fog, mon ami, is a friend to the criminal, and the sea washes many sins away if one is patient enough. The villagers huddled closer, shivering in the cold fog. Who is he? Someone asked. Graves sighed heavily. Thomas Bellamy, local shopkeeper. Missing since last night. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, then we must begin not with the sea, but with the village itself. A man does not die beneath a pier without stepping through many doors on his way. He turned to Graves. May we retrieve the body? Graves signaled 2 officers. They moved carefully, climbing down toward the rocks with ropes. Poirot watched every movement like a hawk. As the officers lifted the corpse onto a stretcher, something slipped from the dead man's pocket and clattered onto the stones. Poirot stepped forward instantly. Silver coin, but strange. Foreign and worn smooth. He picked it up. Interesting, Poirot whispered. A token from a place far from Sablewind village. Graves frowned. You think this matters? Poirot smiled faintly. In murder, my friend, everything matters. As the stretcher was carried toward the road, Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. He bent low once more and examined the rocks. There it was, a faint footprint, half washed by the tide. Facing away from the corpse, someone walked here, Poirot murmured. Stayed long enough to drag the body, then fled toward the pier. He stood, satisfied. The villagers whispered nervously as Poirot walked past them. Is it murder, Mr. Poirot? Will the killer come back? Is anyone else in danger? Poirot raised a hand. Please, Amos, remain calm. Fear is most unhelpful to the little gray cells. But privately, Poirot felt the tension tightening like a rope. For in the foggy air he sensed something he rarely misjudged. Killer was watching. A murderer who believed the sea would hide his crime. A murderer who was clever enough to move a corpse, but not clever enough to escape the eyes of Hercule Poirot. Poirot's gaze swept across the pier, through the fog. Toward the cliffs, a faint figure stood there, just for a moment, before vanishing behind the rocks. Poirot straightened. The killer returns to watch, he whispered. This is very telling. Inspector Graves approached. Poirot, should we begin at Bellamy's house? Poirot shook his head. No, Inspector. We begin here. Always, the crime scene speaks first. He pressed the silver coin into Graves' hand, and this, mon ami, this is a voice shouting into the dark. Listen to it. Poirot stepped onto the pier, looking down once more at the place where the corpse had lain. The waves rolled gently now, as though erasing the past, but Poirot smiled. No crime, he murmured, can hide beneath the waves for long. He turned. The investigation begins. Chapter 2 whispers along the harbor. Sablewind village did not like to admit it, but it had always lived with the sea in a kind of fearful bargain. The sea brought in the fish, the trade, the visitors with pockets full of coin. But every now and then it took something back. By mid-morning, word of the corpse beneath Sablewind Pier had spread from the harbor all the way up the crooked lane to the old church. Curtains twitched. Doors opened a crack and then closed again. Voices dropped to hushed tones that carried strangely clearly in the damp air. Hercule Poirot stood outside the constabulary, regarding the street with a thoughtful expression. Inside, Inspector Graves was arranging to have Thomas Bellamy's body examined more thoroughly. But Poirot had declined to enter. "The dead man," he had said softly. "He has already told me what he can for now. It is the living who remain to speak." And so he walked. The harbor was a mosaic of color and sound. Nets hung from posts, glistening with droplets. Boats bobbed gently in the water, each with its own name painted on the side, chipped but proud. Children who had been sternly warned to stay away from the pier instead hovered close by, watching Poirot with wide, curious eyes. He made his way first to the place where all stories, true or otherwise, began in Sablewind village, the Seashell Inn. The inn's wooden sign creaked as it swung. The painted shell on it faded by years of salt and storm. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stew, smoke, and something else, nervousness. Lanterns cast warm pools of light across worn tables. A few fishermen sat hunched over mugs, talking quietly. Behind the counter stood Lydia Marsh, the innkeeper. She was sturdy, practical, and sharp-eyed in a way that suggested she missed very little. Poirot approached with a polite incline of his head. "Madame Marsh," he said gently. "Hercule Poirot at your service." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I know who you are, sir. Whole village does by now." Her gaze flicked instinctively toward the window, where the outline of the pier was just visible through lingering mist. "You're here about Mr. Bellamy." "Just so," Poirot replied. "I seek only to understand his last day among the living. Often it is in the ordinary hours before the tragedy that the truth hides itself." She hesitated. "You'll want tea, then." Poirot smiled. "Ah, you are kind. A man thinks best, I find, when his hands are not empty." He took a seat at a nearby table. Lydia brought him a pot of tea and a cup, her hands a little less steady than her expression suggested. "Madame," Poirot began, waiting until she met his gaze. "Thomas Bellamy came here often, I think." "Nearly every evening," she replied. "He'd sit right there." She nodded toward a corner table near the window. "1 cup of tea, sometimes 2. "Always alone lately." "Lately?" Poirot echoed. "But not always." She sighed. "He used to be the sort who laughed. Talked with the men about the catch, the prices, the town. But these last months?" He grew quieter, worried-looking, especially after the money troubles started. Poirot's brows rose just slightly. "Everyone knows of these troubles?" "In a village like this, Mr. Poirot, everyone knows where every coin goes," Lydia said dryly. "Bellamy's shop had fewer customers. Debts stack up fast here, especially if you make deals with the wrong people." "Deals," Poirot repeated. "With whom?" Lydia hesitated. "I don't like to point fingers. But if you're asking who he owed the most to," her voice dropped. "Samuel Hargreaves." Poirot stirred his tea thoughtfully. "And Samuel Hargreaves, he is a gentle and patient man, oui? He is a gentle and patient man, oui?" Lydia let out a humorless laugh. He's many things. Patient is not one of them. He lends when no one else will, and then makes sure everyone remembers it. And last night? Poirot asked lightly. Did Monsieur Bellamy come here as usual? She nodded slowly. He did. Came about 8. Looked worse than I've ever seen him. Pale, tense, hands shaking a bit when he held the cup. Did he speak with anyone? Poirot asked. Or only with his tea? Lydia hesitated again, and that, Poirot noted, was as good as a confession that there was more to tell. He spoke to someone, she admitted at last. They sat with him for a while. Low tones, serious. I pretended not to listen. Poirot's eyes twitched with approval. But you listened all the same. She gave him a tight, tired smile. I own an inn, Mr. Poirot. Ears are part of the fixtures. And the person he spoke to? Poirot prompted. You know them? Her jaw clenched. It was Hargreaves, she said at last. Samuel Hargreaves. He came in like a storm, sat opposite Bellamy, and started in on him at once. No shouting, he's not a fool, but his voice had that edge. You know the kind. Poirot nodded. The voice of a man squeezing another man's throat without leaving a mark. Yes, Lydia whispered. Exactly that. Did you catch any words, madame? Snatches, she said. Time's up. No more excuses. And Bellamy, he kept saying, I just need a little longer. When Hargreaves left, Bellamy stayed another 10 minutes. Then he stood, paid for his tea with shaking hands, and walked out toward the pier. Alone? Poirot asked. Yes, I watched from the window. Fog was rolling in heavier. He disappeared into it. She shivered. And that's the last I saw of him. Poirot sat back, his fingertips meeting lightly. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. Helpful, she repeated bitterly. I watched a dead man's last steps and didn't know it. Poirot shook his head gently. No, no. You watched a man fighting for his life, just not with fists. With minutes. And the minutes, madame. They ran out. As he rose to leave, Lydia spoke again. There's something else, she said quietly. Poirot paused when Hargreaves left. She swallowed. Someone else came in a few minutes later, looked around, asked if Bellamy was still here. Ah, Poirot said softly. And who was this someone else? A young man, she replied. Robert Finch, keeps to himself mostly. Sighed he needed to speak to Bellamy urgently. When I told him Bellamy had gone toward the pier, he went after him. Poirot felt the little gray cells take a sharp, satisfying turn. 2 men follow Bellamy into the fog, he murmured. Hargreaves with the anger, Finch with the urgency. And beneath the pier we find only one man. And he is dead. He thanked Lydia once more and stepped out into the cool air. The fog was lifting. But very slowly, so were the lies. Chapter 3. The argument in the fog inspector. Graves was waiting for Poirot near the constabulary when he returned, arms folded, jaw set. He looked like a man who had swallowed bad news and was waiting for someone to confirm it. Well? Graves asked. You've been out listening to the village hum. What's the tune? Poirot gave him a brief summary as they walked together toward the pier. Lydia's account, Bellamy's visible anxiety, the meeting with Hargreaves, and the late arrival of Robert Finch. Hargreaves again, Graves muttered. It always comes back to that man. Do not be so quick, mon ami, Poirot said mildly. A man can be loud, brutish, unpleasant, and still not a murderer. Sometimes the true killer is the one who looks most relieved when suspicion falls on another. Graves grunted. And which one do you suspect of that? Poirot smiled faintly. That, Inspector, is why we must speak with them both. They did not have to search long for Samuel Hargreaves. He stood near the harbor, giving instructions to two men unloading barrels from a cart. Tall, thick-shouldered, with dark hair and a heavy jaw. He wore his authority like a second coat when he saw Poirot and Graves approaching. His expression hardened. If this is about Bellamy, he said abruptly. Even before they reached him, I've already heard. And if you're looking for tears, you're wasting your time. Graves bristled. A man is dead, Hargreaves. And he owed half this village money, Hargreaves replied flatly. Including me. Poirot regarded him with mild interest. Debts are not unusual, monsieur, he said politely. Murder is. Let us not confuse the two. Hargreaves snorted. Whatever the man did after he left my sight, that's his business, not mine. After you left him at the inn, you mean, Poirot said. You did leave him there, n'est-ce pas? Hargreaves hesitated, then looked away. I left. He stayed. That's the long and short of it. But not the truth of it, Poirot said gently. Hargreaves' eyes snapped back to him. Are you calling me a liar? Poirot's tone remained soft. I am calling you afraid, monsieur. And often the bravest way to fear is to tell it. There was a tense silence. The waves crashed. A gull screamed. Hargreaves' fists tightened, then slowly loosened. I went after him, he muttered. You happy now? Graves exhaled sharply. Why? Because I'd had enough, Hargreaves growled. He'd been stringing me along for months with promises and soon and next week. Last night, when he told me he'd have the money soon, I told him if he didn't pay by morning, I'd take his shop. Everything in it. He got shaken. Real shaken. I almost felt sorry for him. He spat into the dirt, almost. He left in a hurry. I stayed. Then I changed my mind. Thought I'd better make sure he didn't do something stupid. Like what? Poirot asked. Run, Hargreaves said. Or go begging to someone else, telling them I was squeezing him. He sighed heavily. So I followed him. Toward the pier? Poirot asked. Hargreaves nodded. Fog was thick by then. I caught up with him halfway down the pier. He was standing there, staring over the edge like the sea was whispering to him. Hargreaves' expression darkened slightly at the memory. I grabbed his arm. Told him he wasn't going anywhere until we finished talking. Poirot tilted his head. And did you? Hargreaves' jaw worked. We argued. I won't lie about that. He kept insisting he'd fix everything another way. Kept saying, you don't understand, Hargreaves. I have something. Something that changes everything. I demanded to know what. He refused to say. Eventually he pulled free and told me to leave him alone. And you? Poirot asked quietly. I left, Hargreaves said. I'm not proud to say it, but I was angry. I thought, fine, let him drown in whatever mess he's made. I walked back up the pier. Didn't lay another finger on him. Poirot watched him closely. Did you see anyone else? Poirot asked. On the pier. In the fog. Hargreaves hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. I thought I saw someone, he admitted slowly. Near the far end. Just a shape. Could have been a trick of the fog. You are a large man, Monsieur Hargreaves, Poirot said calmly. Not easily frightened by shapes. Yet you remembered this one. Why? Hargreaves looked away. Because whoever it was, they moved like they had a purpose. They weren't lost in the fog. They were heading straight to the end of the pier. To meet Bellamy? Poirot suggested. I don't know, Hargreaves muttered. I laughed, that's all. Merci, monsieur, Poirot said softly. You have been more honest than before. It is a good start. Hargreaves snorted, but he did not protest. As they walked away, Graves muttered, He's dirty. But I don't know if he's guilty. Ah, Poirot said. You begin to think like Hercule Poirot. And what does Hercule Poirot think? Graves asked. Poirot's eyes moved to the far end of the pier, where fog still clung more stubbornly. He thinks, Poirot murmured, that the man who kills in fog does not shout. He watches. He waits. And he steps in when the shouting is over. Graves frowned. You think Bellamy was still alive when Hargreaves left him? Poirot nodded. Yes, it was not Hargreaves who arranged the body so carefully among the rocks. A man such as he would leave chaos behind, not choreography. Graves ran a hand through his hair. Then the other man, the one Hargreaves saw in the fog. Maybe the one who walked down the pier with quiet steps, Poirot finished, and walked away with blood on his conscience. They found Robert Finch not far from the boathouse, sitting on an overturned crate, staring out at the sea. He started when he saw them approach, his boyish face pale. Mr. Poirot, he stammered. Inspector. Bonjour, Monsieur Finch, Poirot said kindly. We are told you sought out Thomas Bellamy last night. Robert swallowed. Yes, I needed to speak with him. About what? Graves snapped. Robert flinched. About a job, I heard he might need help at the shop. Things have been difficult for me, Poirot interrupted softly. Monsieur Finch, it is not necessary to lie about something so small. Lydia Marsh says you asked for Bellamy urgently. Your tone, it was not that of a man seeking work. It was that of a man afraid of missing his chance. It was that of a man afraid of missing his chance. Robert's mouth opened and closed. He looked at the pier, then back at Poirot. I knew he was in trouble, Robert said at last. Everyone did. I thought maybe he'd found a way out, and I wanted in on it. A share. Anything to get out of this place. His voice had a sudden bitterness that did not match his nervous demeanor. "So you went after him," Poirot said. "Onto the pier. Into the fog." Robert nodded nervously. "Yes, but when I got there, I saw someone already with him. 2 shadows in the fog. I heard voices, angry. I stayed back. Didn't want to get dragged into a fight, you understand." "And the voices?" Poirot asked. "You recognized any?" "I think one was Hargreaves," Robert said. "Big shape. Big movements." Bellamy's voice sounded desperate. I panicked. I turned back." Graves frowned. "You didn't stay. Didn't watch what happened?" Robert shook his head quickly. "No, I'm not a brave man, Inspector. I didn't want any part of that." Poirot studied him quietly. "And yet," Poirot said, "this morning you were very eager to help in the telling of events. Conveniently frightened. Perfectly placed. You say you turned away from the argument. But I wonder, Monsieur Finch." He stepped closer, his voice nearly a whisper. "Did you turn away? Or did you wait until the shouting stopped and the fog had grown thick enough for murder?" Robert's face drained of color. I didn't kill him," he whispered. "I swear it." Poirot said nothing, but his little gray cells were already marching, forming patterns. There had been shouting. There had been fear. There had been a heavy man who left, and then there had been a second man, quiet and deliberate, and somewhere beneath the pier. The corpse had been laid among the rocks, posed as if the sea itself had claimed him. But Hercule Poirot knew better. The sea takes. It does not arrange. He looked back toward the pier, its long frame stretching out over the gray water like a finger pointing to the truth. Soon, he thought, Sablewind Pier. You will speak more clearly. And when you do, the killer will hear himself in your voice. Chapter 4. The Lighthouse Keepers. Warning: the sea grew rough as midday approached, the waves slamming against the rocks with growing impatience. Sablewind Lighthouse stood tall against the stormy horizon, an old stone tower streaked with salt, its lantern dim in the fog-heavy daylight. To many villagers, it was a symbol of safety. But to Hercule Poirot, it was something else entirely, a place of visibility, a place where someone could observe the pier. Unseen, Poirot reached the lighthouse by the narrow cliff path, his coat buffeted by the wind. Inspector Graves trudged behind him, muttering something about damned sea weather and city detectives with delicate shoes. Poirot ignored him completely. Calder Wexley, the lighthouse keeper, opened the heavy wooden door before they even knocked. His face was thin, aged, and weather-beaten, his eyes sharp enough to slice fog. "You're the detective," Calder said. "And you're late." Poirot blinked. "Late, monsieur?" "For a murder," Calder replied. "Always late. The sea tells you first. You never want to listen." Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Graves, then stepped inside. The lighthouse interior smelled of lamp oil, salt, and iron, old metal, and older secrets. Calder led them to a cluttered room where maps were pinned to the wall. Strings connecting points along the coastline, Poirot noticed something instantly. Several strings led directly to Sablewind Pier. "Monsieur," Poirot asked softly, "are you charting boat traffic?" Calder huffed. "Of course I am. Someone has to keep this place safe, and someone has to know what happens at night." Poirot raised a brow. "At night?" Calder's gaze sharpened. "Bellamy came here last night. Around 11. Looked shaken. Sighed he needed to check something." Poirot felt his heartbeat quicken slightly. "What did he check, monsieur?" Calder stepped aside and tapped a leather-bound book, the lighthouse logbook. Poirot leaned closer. The last page was torn. "Ripped hastily. Bellamy tore out a page," Calder said. "Then he left without a word." Poirot's mind raced. A torn page. A secret, a smuggling route, perhaps. Calder's jaw muscle twitched. "Smuggling? I didn't say that." Poirot smiled faintly. "But you did not deny it, monsieur." Calder swallowed hard. Poirot turned another page. Several entries were scratched out. Some were rewritten. Some didn't match Calder's handwriting at all. Poirot tapped the ink. "Who else writes in this book, monsieur?" Calder hesitated. "My assistant," he muttered. "Rowan Fisher." Poirot felt the little gray cells dance. Rowan. The one who found the body. The one who pretended fear. The one who had every reason to know what passed beneath the pier. A gust of wind shook the lighthouse, rattling lantern hooks. Calder's voice dropped. "I saw someone last night from the top. A figure on the pier. Not Bellamy. Not Hargreaves. Someone else." He shivered. He stood at the end of the pier for a long time. Too long. Poirot stepped closer. "Monsieur, can you describe him?" Calder shook his head. Fog covered him, but he moved with intention. Poirot nodded slowly. "Monsieur Calder, I believe someone in this village uses the fog as his mask." And he believed Bellamy was about to expose something. Calder's voice cracked. "You think Bellamy found something in the logbook?" Poirot tapped the torn page. "I think he found someone's secret route, and that someone followed him to the pier." He straightened. "Merci, monsieur. You have helped more than you know." As they exited the lighthouse, the wind howled like a warning. Poirot paused on the cliff edge, deep in thought. Graves spoke first. "So, Rowan Fisher, Hargreaves, Finch, someone's lying." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Inspector. But only one man is lying with purpose." He looked toward the harbor, where Rowan worked silently, "and I believe he fears more than the waves." Poirot lifted his collar against the wind. "The killer is close, mon ami. Very close. He watches us even now." Chapter 5. The Widow's Shattered Comptonus. Bellamy's house sat on the hill overlooking the harbor, a modest structure with faded blue shutters and a sloping roof weathered by years of storms. The path leading to the door was lined with stones and wilted flowers, as though someone had once cared, but no longer had the strength to tend them. Poirot and Graves walked up the path in silence. Inside, they heard the sound of soft sobbing. Eleanor Bellamy, the widow, opened the door slowly. Her eyes were swollen, her dark hair pulled back hastily. She wore a shawl draped over trembling shoulders. "Mrs. Bellamy," Poirot said gently, bowing his head. "I am Hercule Poirot. May we speak with you?" She nodded faintly and stepped aside. The interior was warm but dim. Curtains were drawn. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, and on the mantelpiece stood a single photograph, Thomas Bellamy, smiling awkwardly. Eleanor's voice cracked. They told me he suffered." Poirot shook his head softly. "Non, madame. He did not suffer long, and I promise you I will find the truth." She covered her mouth as tears spilled over. Poirot waited with patience, giving her time, until at last she lowered her hands and whispered, "I knew something was wrong last night." Poirot leaned forward. "Please, madame, tell us." "He came home late." "Very late," she said, her voice trembling. "And he was shaking. Hands, voice, everything." She sat down slowly, clutching the shawl. I asked him what had happened. He said he had gone to the lighthouse, that he found something he called dangerous, something that would change everything. Poirot felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "Madam," he said softly, "did he show you anything?" "A paper, perhaps?" She shook her head. "He hid it. I don't know where. I begged him to stay home, but he said someone was waiting for him, that he needed to go to the pier to meet them." Poirot and Graves exchanged a glance. "Did he tell you who he was meeting?" Graves asked. "No." Eleanor whispered. "But he said, if it goes right, we're saved. If it goes wrong..." She covered her face again. "Oh, God." Poirot waited until she steadied herself. "There is more, yes?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "He received a letter yesterday. It frightened him. Truly frightened him." Poirot leaned closer. "Where is this letter, madame?" She stood shakily and walked to a drawer. From it, she withdrew a small envelope. Poirot accepted it carefully. The handwriting inside was jagged, rush-dotted red. "Meet me at the pier at midnight. No excuses. No delays. Bring what you took." The signature was a single initial. R. Poirot froze. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I believe our net begins to tighten." Graves exhaled sharply. "R. Rowan? Robert Finch? Someone else?" Poirot turned the letter over, studying the pressure marks in the ink. The hand shakes slightly, but deliberately. A man used to writing at night, perhaps by dim light. He folded the letter. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you have helped more than you know." Eleanor's voice broke again. "Will you find who did this? Will you bring justice?" Poirot placed a gentle hand over hers. "Madame, justice for your husband is already on its way." As they stepped outside, the cold wind slapped their faces. Graves muttered, "So Bellamy stole something from the lighthouse. Someone wanted it back. Someone signed with an R. Could be Rowan. Could be Robert. Could be..." Poirot raised a hand. "No assumptions, Inspector. Only facts. And here are the facts. One man met Bellamy at the pier. One man followed him into the fog. One man dragged his body beneath the pier. Poirot's eyes narrowed toward the boathouse, and that man is now becoming nervous. The fog thickened again. Swirling like a shroud around Sablewind Pier, Poirot's mustache twitched. "Now," he whispered, "we begin to corner our killer." Chapter 6. Shadows Beneath the Lantern Light. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened into a dense curtain over Sablewind Pier. Lanterns had been lit early, their dim yellow glow flickering like trembling hearts against the persistent mist. The tide pulled in with a restless rhythm, as if the sea itself sensed that truth was edging closer. Poirot stood near the center of the pier, his polished shoes gleaming faintly in the scattered light. Inspector Graves arrived moments later, breathless and annoyed, partly at the weather, partly at the case. "You've dragged me out here again," Graves grunted. "What now?" Poirot pointed with his cane toward a dark smear near the edge of the planks. "A scuff mark," Poirot said, "created by a shoe dragged sideways." Graves leaned down. "Lots of scuff marks on a pier." None, Inspector," Poirot said sharply. "Not like this. This one was made last night, and it was made by someone pulling weight, dragging something heavy. Dragging Bellamy," Graves muttered. "Just so." Poirot crouched. The smear was faint, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. But to Poirot it spoke loudly. "This," he murmured, "is where the killer pulled the body from the pier down toward the rocks. The angle, the pressure. Ah, it is all here." Graves frowned. "Why drag him under the pier?" Poirot stood slowly. "Because the killer wished the tides to take him. He hoped the sea would hide the truth. But the sea, mon ami, it is a poor accomplice. It returns what it is given." They walked to the far end of the pier. The fog was heaviest there, swirling in ghostly shapes. Poirot stopped abruptly. There a faint indentation along the railing. Poirot ran a gloved hand along it. "A hand rested here," Poirot whispered. "A man stood here, watching the argument between Hargreaves and Bellamy, unseen in the fog." Graves' eyes narrowed. "So the witness wasn't lying?" Poirot shook his head. "Oh, the witness did not lie. No, he omitted." Graves stared. "Omitted what?" Poirot tapped the railing. "That he was not merely watching, but planning." Another gust of wind rattled the wooden beams beneath them. The sea roared, swallowing the silence. Poirot's voice lowered. There were 3 men on the pier. One shouting, one pleading, one waiting. Graves swallowed. "You think the waiting one was the killer?" Poirot nodded. "A man who waits for 2 others to exhaust themselves. A man who moves when the fog grows thick. A man who steps quietly and kills with precision." Graves rubbed the back of his neck. "Finch?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "He panics too perfectly, speaks too much of fear. But a man truly afraid does not rehearse terror. He blunders. Finch does not blunder." They turned back toward the harbor, where lanterns bobbed gently in the breeze. Across the way, Rowan Fisher was hauling crates into his boat, jaw clenched, shoulders tense. Rowan hides guilt of a different kind, Poirot murmured. But I do not think him a killer. So who then? Graves pressed. Poirot stopped walking. Inspector, he said softly, did you ever wonder why only one initial was signed on the threatening letter to Bellamy? Graves frowned. Ah? Poirot nodded. A clever touch. Too clever. Because a man who signs with only the first letter of his name chooses a letter seen by many. Well, Graves said, Rowan starts with R. Robert Finch starts with R. Who else? Poirot's mustache twitched. Someone else entirely. And more dangerous. Before Graves could respond, a shout echoed across the harbor. Poirot! Inspector! It was Lydia Marsh, waving from outside the inn, breathless. They rushed toward her. It's Mrs. Bellamy. Lydia cried. She found something hidden in her husband's coat lining. Poirot's eyes sharpened. At last, he whispered, the missing piece. They hurried up the hill to Bellamy's house. Eleanor stood inside the doorway, pale but resolute. In her hand she held a crumpled, sea-damp page. Poirot accepted it with care. It was a torn sheet from the lighthouse logbook. But not an ordinary page. This one listed several boat arrivals at impossible hours. Boats with no registry. Boats connected to no known trade. But one name appeared repeatedly. The Rook. Poirot inhaled sharply. Ah, he murmured. Now at last the shape in the fog takes form. Graves squinted. The Rook? That's a smuggler's vessel. It was seized months ago. Seized, Poirot said, but not before its captain vanished. Graves stiffened. You think he's here? In Sablewind? Poirot folded the paper carefully. Oui, Inspector, he said softly. He is here. And he signs his threats with an R. A long silence followed. Then Eleanor whispered, Mr. Poirot. Who is he? Poirot's eyes drifted toward the harbor, where a small shed stood at the far edge. A place everyone passed by, but no one entered. A place belonging to someone quiet, unassuming, invisible. Poirot whispered, a man who hides in plain sight. Chapter 7. The tide that brings truth dusk settled over the harbor like a shroud. Lanterns flickered to life one by one. The fog thickened again, almost unnaturally. Poirot knew this was the hour when the killer would act or flee. He walked purposefully toward the far pier shed, Inspector Graves trailing behind with growing unease. You're certain he's in there? Graves murmured. Poirot did not answer. He did not need to. The little gray cells were dancing with perfect clarity. They reached the shed. Its door was slightly ajar. Graves drew his revolver. Poirot raised a hand. Non, mon ami. This man carries no gun. They stepped inside. It was dark, save for a dim lantern in the corner. The room smelled of rope, sea brine, and old wood. A stack of crates sat against the far wall. Illegal cargo, Poirot suspected, and beside them stood Robert Finch, except he was no longer trembling, no longer timid, no longer the frightened witness. He stood with straight shoulders, calm eyes, and a faint smile. So, Robert said quietly, you figured it out. Poirot stepped forward, You are not Robert Finch, Poirot said. Not truly. That name belongs to the boy whose papers you stole. Robert's smile deepened. And you must be Hercule Poirot. I've heard of you. You are the captain of the Rook, Poirot continued. A smuggling ship. You vanished when the authorities closed in. You came to Sablewind to rebuild your network. And Bellamy found your roots in the lighthouse logbook. Robert shrugged. Bellamy wanted money. I offered him a deal. Return the page, keep silent, and I'd let him live. But he demanded more. Said he'd expose everything unless I paid him a fortune. Poirot nodded. So you sent the letter. I asked him to return the page. Nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But when he refused, when he clung to his last scrap of power, you followed him into the fog. Robert exhaled. He stumbled near the edge. I pushed. It wasn't personal. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, monsieur. Murder is never merely a push. It is a decision. A cold one. Graves stepped forward. You're under arrest. Robert didn't move. Instead, he looked past Poirot toward the open door. You're forgetting the sea, Inspector, he said softly. It always offers a way out. But Poirot smiled. No, monsieur. Not tonight. A shadow appeared behind Robert. Rowan Fisher, holding a length of rope. Robert stiffened. You, he hissed. Rowan's voice trembled. I only helped with the logs. I never wanted any of this. And when you killed Bellamy, when you made me hide it, Robert lunged, but Rowan swung the rope, knocking him off balance. Graves seized him, forcing him to the ground. Robert snarled like a trapped wolf. Poirot approached calmly. It is finished, Poirot whispered. The fog is no longer your ally. Robert spat. You can't prove anything. Poirot knelt. Au contraire. You left a scuff mark on the pier. A torn page in the logbook. A false name in the village. And a witness who finally chose courage. Rowan swallowed but nodded. Graves snapped handcuffs around Robert's wrists. You're done. Robert glared at Poirot. You're a fool. Poirot stood. No, monsieur. I am simply observant. He turned toward the door. The fog was lifting, just slightly enough to reveal Sablewind Pier in its solemn beauty. The tide rises, Poirot murmured. And truth rises with it. Chapter 8. Confessions in the fog. The storm began its approach long before the villagers realized it. A low rumble echoed from the horizon, drifting over the sea like the growl of some ancient beast awakening beneath the waves. Lanterns along Sablewind Pier flickered, their flames bending under the gathering wind. Inside the constabulary, Robert Finch, now stripped of his false identity, sat in a wooden chair. Wrists bound, face streaked with the remnants of seawater and sweat. His earlier bravado had vanished. He looked small now, diminished, as if the truth had made him shrink. Inspector Graves paced in the background, muttering to himself, but Poirot stood perfectly still before the prisoner, arms folded behind his back. Let us begin again, monsieur, Poirot said softly. You are not Robert Finch. Your true name is Rowan Fenn, known in certain circles as the Rook. Robert's jaw tightened. Names don't matter." "Ah, but they do," Poirot replied. "A man chooses names the way he chooses masks. You chose Robert Finch because he was invisible, quiet, unassuming, a young man the village would pity, not suspect. A young man the village would pity, not suspect." Robert said nothing. Poirot circled him slowly. "You smuggled goods for years along this coastline. You used the lighthouse logs to track tides and patrol routes. Calder, the keeper, believed he was helping harmless fishermen by letting boat records slip." Poirot leaned closer. "But you, monsieur, you used him." Robert scoffed. "Calder was paid well. And Bellamy?" Poirot asked. "Was he paid well too?" A flicker crossed Robert's face, a crack in his armor. "He came here by accident," Robert muttered. "If he hadn't gone to that lighthouse, none of this would have happened." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "So you admit it? He discovered your smuggling routes?" Robert turned away. He took that page, waved it like it was winning lottery ticket. Thought he could blackmail me. His fists clenched. Said if I didn't pay him, he'd reveal everything. He didn't understand the kind of people he was dealing with. "And so," Poirot said quietly, "you wrote the letter." Robert's eyes hardened. "I asked him to return what he stole. That is all. I wasn't going to kill him." Poirot tilted his head. "Not initially. But when he refused, when he demanded more, you changed your mind." Robert swallowed. His silence was the first true confession. Poirot continued, voice like a calm blade. "You followed him into the fog. You waited until Hargreaves left. Then you approached Bellamy. He was afraid. He backed up. Perhaps he slipped. Or perhaps you pushed." Robert's voice shook, barely audible. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Poirot knelt, lowering his voice until it wrapped around the prisoner like a whisper of the sea. "Monsieur, he begged you for mercy. Did he not?" Robert's eyes darted upward, and for the first time, tears rimmed their edges. "He said he had a wife," Robert whispered. "Said he did it to save her. I just wanted that page. Then why hide the body?" Poirot asked. Robert exhaled shakily. "Because Bellamy was dead. And dead men. Speak the loudest." Poirot stood, straightening his coat. "You arranged him beneath the pier. You hoped the tide would claim him. But the sea chose otherwise." Robert shut his eyes. Poirot spoke gently, but with unyielding firmness. "You believed yourself clever. But you forgot the most important truth, monsieur. Fog hides shapes. But it never hides guilt." Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm was arriving. Graves approached the table and slammed his palm down. "Where is the rest of your crew, then? Where are the others?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Gone. They sailed north 2 weeks ago. Left me to rebuild the route. I needed money. Bellamy had the page, and everything fell apart." Poirot raised a hand to silence Graves. "Monsieur," Poirot asked, "one last question. Who helped you place the body?" Robert stiffened. "No one." Poirot nodded slowly. He knew when a liar had reached the edge of his lies. Rowan Fisher, Calder, Hargreaves, all were entangled in secrets. But none were murderers. No. Robert had acted alone. Poirot placed his hat back onto his head. "Inspector," he said softly, "charge him formally. The sea will no longer carry his sins." As they stepped outside into the wind, Graves murmured, "We're done then, Poirot." Poirot's eyes lifted toward the blackening sky, almost mon ami. "There remains a matter most important." "What matter?" Poirot turned toward the hill where Bellamy's widow lived. "A widow waits for truth," Poirot said quietly. "And truth must be delivered gently." The wind howled, carrying the scent of rain. Poirot moved on. Chapter 9. The widow's final answer. Evening laid a dark, blue blanket over Sablewind village as the storm pressed closer. Lanterns flickered wildly along the streets, their flames bending and stretching under the rising wind. The villagers hurried to shutter their windows, tie down their boats, and retreat indoors safe from the wrath approaching from the sea. But Hercule Poirot did not seek shelter. He climbed steadily toward the Bellamy house, each step deliberate. The door opened before he knocked. Eleanor Bellamy stood framed by candlelight, her grief-worn face steady now, though the shadows beneath her eyes told stories no words could. "Mr. Poirot," she whispered. "Is it over?" Poirot removed his hat. "Madame," he said gently, "may I come in?" She stepped aside, and he entered the parlor where Thomas Bellamy's photo still rested on the mantel. A small fire crackled, offering warmth against the brewing storm. Poirot sat. Eleanor stood, wringing her hands. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "tell me what happened. Tell me the truth." "All of it." Poirot nodded slowly. "Madame, your husband sought to protect you. He found something dangerous in the lighthouse log records of illegal shipments, and he hoped to use that discovery to escape the debts that burdened him." Eleanor closed her eyes. "He told me he had found a way out," she whispered. "I didn't know it was so serious." Poirot continued, his tone gentle. He arranged to meet the man responsible. He hoped to exchange the torn page for money, enough to save you both. But the man he confronted was not one who bargains with mercy. Eleanor asked, barely audible, "The man, he killed Thomas?" Poirot nodded softly. "Yes, madame. His name is Rowan Fenn. He masqueraded as Robert Finch. He is a smuggler, a man with much to lose." Eleanor's knees weakened and she sank into a chair. Poirot's voice lowered. "Your husband confronted him. They argued. In the fog, things escalated. Whether he slipped or was pushed matters little now. The intention was murder. Once it happened, the killer hid the body beneath the pier." Eleanor covered her mouth. After several moments, she whispered, "Was Thomas afraid? Was he in pain?" Poirot shook his head with warmth in his eyes. "No, madame. It was quick. And he fought for you until the very end." A tear escaped down her cheek. Poirot added softly, "He did not die in despair. He died with hope that what he fought for might save you from suffering." She cried silently into her hands. Poirot waited. He always waited. For grief required space. When she finally lifted her head, her voice was steadier. "What will happen to him?" "To the man who did this?" Poirot replied, "He will face justice." and the sea he tried to use as his accomplice, will never again carry him to freedom. Eleanor breathed deeply. Thank you, Mr. Poirot. Poirot stood. I will leave you now, madame, but before I go, I ask only this. Do not remember Thomas for the fear of his last night. Remember him for the years before. The love, the laughter, the man he truly was. She nodded. Poirot stepped outside. The wind blew fiercely now, whipping his coat about his legs. Rain drizzled, carried sideways by the gale. Graves jogged up the hill, shouting over the wind. Poirot! The storm's getting worse. We should get inside. Poirot simply looked toward Sablewind Pier, where lanterns swung wildly in the wind like panicked hearts. Do you know why I love storms, Inspector? Poirot asked quietly. Graves blinked. Why's that? Poirot smiled faintly. Because storms wash away what does not belong. And tonight, Sablewind Village will finally be clean. The first bolt of lightning split the sky open, illuminating the entire pier in a flash of white. Poirot turned toward the inn. Come, mon ami, he said softly. The truth has been served. Now let us wait for the storm to finish its work. And as thunder rolled over the village, the shadows that had clung to Sablewind for months finally broke apart, scattered by justice, and by the unwavering mind of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 10. The Storm That Washed the Pier Clean. Storm reached Sablewind Village with a fury that few had seen in years. Lightning tore through the sky in jagged white scars, illuminating the restless sea. Waves crashed against the rocks with a beast's rage, sending spray high into the air. The wind roared like a choir of ghosts released from the cliffs, and through it all, the pier stood shaking, groaning, but unbroken. Inside the Seashell Inn, lanterns flickered wildly as villagers huddled together, murmuring prayers, sharing anxious glances, and occasionally glancing toward Hercule Poirot, who sat calmly at a small table near the window. His composure, even amidst the storm, brought the room an odd sense of steadiness. Inspector Graves banged the inn door shut behind him. Drenched by the rain, Poirot, he shouted over the thunder. The prisoner's secure. The constable's watching him. But this storm will be lucky if half the boats survive it. Poirot stirred his tea delicately. The boats can be rebuilt, Inspector, Poirot said. A village can recover from loss, but not from a killer left free. Graves flopped into the chair opposite him, exhausted. I still can't believe it, Graves muttered. Robert Finch. Wasn't Robert Finch a smuggler? A killer? Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He wore innocence like a costume. Many criminals do. It is the quiet ones you must watch. Thunder crackled overhead. The window rattled violently. Poirot's eyes drifted toward the pier, barely visible through the storm, but just enough for him to see lanterns swinging wildly, casting frantic circles of light. Inspector, Poirot said suddenly. Graves straightened. What? Poirot placed his cup down gently. There is still one thing left undone. The inspector frowned. We've caught the killer. What else is there? Poirot rose, adjusting his coat. The murder is solved, yes. But the truth, the complete truth. still rests beneath the pier. Without waiting for Graves, Poirot stepped into the storm. The pier and the tempest wind cut across Poirot's face like knives of cold salt water. Rain lashed down in slanted sheets. But he moved forward steadily, his shoes clicking along the soaked cobblestones, refusing to falter even as the gusts threatened to unbalance him. By the time he reached the pier entrance, the wooden structure shook violently under each wave's assault. The lanterns barely clung to their hooks. Graves caught up, shielding his eyes. "Poirot, are you mad?" "The pier isn't safe." Poirot raised a finger. "And yet, Inspector, truth often sits where danger does." He stepped onto the pier. The wood creaked beneath them, water splashing up between the planks. The fog had been shredded by the storm, leaving the pier raw and exposed. Poirot walked toward the spot where Bellamy's body had been found, the memory sharp in his mind. "Here," Poirot said softly. "Here is where the tale began. A man dead, a village afraid, and a killer hiding in plain sight." Graves shivered, not from the cold, but from something else. "But the killer's caught," Graves repeated stubbornly. "Case closed." Poirot turned to him. "Inspector, have you never wondered why Bellamy came to the pier in the first place? Why he chose to meet the killer here?" Graves frowned. "Because the killer told him to." Poirot shook his head. "No, Bellamy chose this place." Graves blinked. "Why?" Poirot knelt, bracing himself against the wind, and lifted a plank of the pier, one slightly looser than the others. Beneath it, wrapped in a cloth pouch, was a small metal box. Graves gasped. "Is that?" Poirot smiled gently. "The missing evidence. What Bellamy hid. What he intended to use as his protection." He opened the box. Inside were the lighthouse log page, a small notebook filled with times and boat names, a list of transactions, a tally of smuggled goods, and a name, Rowan Fenn. The Rook. Graves' jaw dropped. Bellamy hid this? He knew the killer would come back for him, so he left it here? "Oui," Poirot said. "He could not outrun the smuggler, but he could leave clues behind. He could hide the truth somewhere the killer would not look. And he chose the pier," Graves whispered, understanding dawning. "Because the killer avoided it during storms." Poirot nodded. "Exactement." Another wave crashed beneath them, shaking the planks. Poirot stood. "This evidence proves the entire smuggling network. More than Rowan's confession. More than the torn page. With this, Sablewind Village will be free of his shadow forever." Graves took the box reverently. "Poirot, you saved this village." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, Inspector. Bellamy did. Even in death, he tried to protect those he cared for." Lightning flared, illuminating the entire village below. Poirot looked toward the inn where Eleanor Bellamy waited. "She will sleep easier tonight," Poirot said quietly. "And the village?" Graves asked. Poirot looked to the storm, which was slowly beginning to shift, moving inland. "The storm," Poirot murmured, "cleanses all." Dawn over Sablewind be morning. The storm had passed. The sea lay still, exhausted. The air smelled of salt and renewal. Villagers emerged cautiously from their homes. They found fallen branches, scattered nets, overturned barrels, but no tragedy beyond that. The pier had survived. Poirot stood near the harbor, suitcase in hand, admiring the calm sea. Graves approached him with a steaming cup of tea. "You leaving so soon?" Graves asked. Poirot sipped the tea. "The little gray cells insist, Inspector. There are other crimes, other mysteries, other mustache waxes needed." Graves chuckled. "If you ever retire, Poirot, you should move here. We'd sleep easier." Poirot adjusted his hat. "Inspector, if I retire, crime would multiply instantly. The world cannot be trusted without Hercule Poirot." Graves laughed outright this time. A soft voice called from behind them, "Mr. Poirot?" It was Eleanor Bellamy. She held a small bouquet of white coastal flowers. "For you," she said softly. "A thank you for giving my husband dignity and for giving me peace." Poirot accepted them gently. "Madame, peace is earned by truth, and truth, once revealed, is a gift to all." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Poirot stepped into the awaiting carriage as it began to roll away. He looked back one last time at Sablewind Pier, standing tall, proud, cleansed by storm and justice. A village, Poirot murmured to himself, is like the tide. It rises, it falls, but with care it endures. The sea shimmered as the sun finally broke through the clouds, and Hercule Poirot, satisfied that the case had reached its rightful end, leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes.